Hello everyone, welcome to the channel entitled Fitty Ain't Nothing But a Number Yo, with your host Language Barrel. On this channel, we'll meet individuals who after the age of 50, who have decided to change what they do, what they believe, what they think is possible, what they read or are reading, and lastly, who they are. This will be done by conducting interviews, reviewing short stories, and videos with the individuals in question. So if you're ready, let's meet some interesting people. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Man Overboard 50 Ain't Nothing But a Number Yo with your host, Language Barrel. For the next upcoming series of videos, I'm going to be focusing on possible places for retirement outside of the U.S. As they appear, and initially they will appear in no specific order, they'll just appear randomly. But as I begin to narrow my search down, I'll list my top 3 places for possible retirement in that order with the number 1, number 2, and number 3. Not only will I specify the country, but I'll also specify the city or region that I'm specifically targeting. So if you're ready, let's get started. First up on the list is going to be Colombia. So if you're like many people, and myself included, all I really knew before I visited Colombia was what I saw on Narcos, which was a Netflix series on the rise of cocaine traffickers in Colombia. Now, they primarily focus on Pablo Escobar, the leader of the Medellin drug cartel, and one of the most ruthless drug lords to ever come out of Latin America. Now, it focused on his rise from drug kingpin beginning in 1975 up to including his death in 1993. So again, I'm not going to really focus on that. If you want to look up Pablo Escobar, you can find him on the web. You can also look at the Netflix series and you'll see exactly what I saw before I went there. The other reason I'm not going to focus on it, and probably the most critical reason, is because Colombians don't consider that a very enlightening part of their future. A lot of innocent people died. The government was in shambles, and this guy, I think, ran for president, so it was possible that they thought he might even become a dictator. So the Colombians are not very proud of that past, of that Pablo Escobar past, so they try to ignore it or try to talk about it as little as possible. So I'm not going to talk about it any more than I already did. So generally, when I look at places for possible retirement, I break them down into categories. I look at healthcare, crime, cost of living, infrastructure, temperature, and culture. So if you're ready to get started, let's get started. Up first, Colombia, healthcare. Now, I would admit that Colombian healthcare surprised me. I didn't realize that it was recognized as one of the best healthcare systems in the world, rated above both Canada and the U.S., and equal to many top world or first world countries. Now, depending on where you look for your research, I found it rated as high as 22nd most efficient healthcare system in the world, operating both a public and a private system, with the public system covering approximately 65% of the citizens. Now, in major urban centers such as Bogota, Medellin, and Cali, you'll find that that public system covers about 100% of the individuals. The problem is, however, as you start to move away from the urban centers and you get into more of the rural or small town environments, that's when the system really struggles to provide adequate care and quality care to these residents. But you should be aware that the U.S. struggles with the same issues. I mean, you move away from a lot of the urban centers in the United States and get into rural and small towns, and you'll find that delivering healthcare, quality healthcare to those residents is a challenge. The one thing that the U.S. did to alleviate that was really start to push this remote care. Those that can afford it, those people that can afford to pay the additional cost for the private system, they do opt for the private system as a supplemental system above the public system. And this allows them to, one, get quicker access to care. The public system can be extremely busy and extremely crowded and extremely slow. It also allows them to get a higher quality of care because they're, as you can imagine, because it's private, you get better doctors, better equipment, better hospitals, more trained staff, etc. Now, the government spends about 20% of their funding on healthcare system. Approximately 5% of the total GDP of the country is spent on healthcare. When you look at copays, or you look at the part that the resident has to contribute for labs, diagnostics, specialists, medication, they're all on kind of a tier system, which means based on your income. So you may be paying $1 or $4 or $11, again, based on income. So when I say dollars, please be mindful that I'm talking about US dollars. I'm not the equivalent to what it would cost in pesos. So a US dollar, um, I think, is generally five to one. Um, so for every $1, I think there's like it's worth 1,000 pesos or something like that. Um, so when I say $1, I mean $1, not 1 peso. All right. So if we're ready, we're going to move on to the next one, which is crime. So crime in Colombia, both violent and petty crime, is significant um, in Colombia, especially in and around urban centers. Now, even the small towns and rural areas can be dangerous, but for a different reason, right? Because it's possible that you may have some illegal armed groups or some juntas that are trafficking drugs in these regions, and so they control these regions. And depending on how far it is away from the urban environment or how rural an area it is, there may not even be any government troops that go into the area. It may be totally controlled by this junta or some gun lord in that specific area. Now, let me say on a personal note, like I've traveled to Colombia several times. I've been to all the major cities: Bogota, Cartagena, Cali, and Medellin. And I've never had any personal problems with crime on the street. Right? I've talked to a lot of people who've had their phones stolen, their wallets stolen, they've been robbed. Um, uh, but I've never had that occur with me. Now, I will say that I rented an Airbnb, so I had a guest come over and we had some property stolen. And so when we called the police to come, um, I guess, calm the matter and rectify it, once they got the person out, and then the policeman turned to me and he said, okay, now we're friends, so what can you do for your friend? Now, was that a bribe? Well, I don't think it was a bribe because I didn't do anything illegal. But was it a donation to the benevolence fund? I don't know. But I had armed men in my apartment who were asking for money. So I gave them the money, and you can take it however you want to take it. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right. So there are some advisories in and around Colombia, and one of the advisories is that be careful when you hail taxis on the street. Some of them are illegal taxis. Some of them are in cahoots with gangs, and they may take you to a destination. You may be robbed or threatened or whatever. Also, be careful using ATM machines in either busy areas or excluded areas. Now, typically, when I have to get cash out of an ATM machine, I generally go to the malls. They have some of the nicest malls I've ever been to, much nicer than the malls in the U.S. But they all have armed security in the malls, usually at the doors. And so it's very safe in the malls to use the ATM machines and the bank machines. So if I'm going to pull out cash, that's where I'm going to pull it out. And you should be aware that Colombia is a cash culture. So there are, in around larger areas, there are vendors that accept major credit cards. But by and large, it is a cash culture. So you will need to have access to cash to pay for food, clothing, whatever you're getting, unless you're in one of the more commercial malls where they will take credit cards and debit cards. Now, sadly, one of the most dangerous crimes that happens in and around Colombia is this use of the drug scopolamine. They use it as a disabling drug to drug you and then rob you, steal personal property, so on and so forth. And they can flip it into your food or drink. It's kind of, if you know anything about the old Navy days where people used to get shanghaied, where they slip something in somebody's drink and then you just cart them off. That's very similar to what happened. Or if you know the drug Rohypnol, which is what a lot of guys do, and they drug girls and then take them back and commit sexual assault on them. It's the same premise with this drug. Now, the problem, obviously, when you have untrained people administering drugs that are not supposed to administer in that fashion, is it can be extremely dangerous if the dosage is way too high when you get administered the drug. So also, when we talk about crime, we have to talk about index. Index is the way we allows us to compare crime from different cities, different countries, different regions. So Colombia has a crime index of 60.36. Now, a high is it's generally crimes are broken into three indexes: low 20 to 40, mid 41 to 60, high 60 and above. Colombia falls in the high crime index, so it's a high crime destination. Now, the other thing they look at is they look at the safety index, which is the inverse of the crime. So if you have high crime, then you probably got low safety. If you have high safety, then you have low crime. So their safety index is 39.64. Um, Again, anything above 60 is very safe. 41 to 60 is moderate. Anything below 40 is considered an unsafe environment. So again, they're at 39.64. So they fall in the unsafe category. Now, next up, we're going to look at cost of living. So the average monthly salary after taxes is $300. Obviously, depending on if you're in a city or urban environment, what if you're in a very exclusive part of the city versus a very poor part of the city, that's going to vary. But the average is $300. Again, I use dollars because as an expat, that's what I'm going to be converting to pesos. So the average after salary tax is $300. The average monthly cost of living is $546. Now this is local. This is not you going there trying to live an American lifestyle in Colombia. A one-bedroom apartment near the city center is going to be $232. Now this is not going to be you living around other expats. This is going to be you living among local people. Now they also have a tier system with housing, one being the cheapest house and six being the wealthiest. So at that price, you could be anywhere. I think they call it strata. So you could be anywhere in the strata 2, strata 3 at that 232. But that's what it's going to be, $232 for a one-bedroom apartment in city center, not among expats and tourists. All right. So that's kind of in line with some other developing nations in Latin America. I say all this to say that it's possible for a person to retire in Colombia with an average Social Security benefit of $1,827 to live a fairly decent life in Colombia. It's strictly on Social Security retirement benefits. We're going to talk about weather. So when we talk about weather, Colombia is a country with many climates based on altitudes. They have the sea, they have the mountain, the coastline, the valley, the desert. They have tropical. So whatever your flavor is, you can find a place in Colombia to live with corresponding weather. Specifically, I focus on the cities because as an expat or as someone outside the country, generally that's where they're going to live because that's generally where the best services are. So I'm going to start with Cartagena. That's along the Caribbean. So because it's on the Caribbean, it's going to be warm and hot, right? So it's going to be like 81 degrees. That's the average temperature. Now you should remember Cartagena is probably the most tourist visited city in Colombia, both from locals and nationals. So your prices are going to be correspondingly higher. Bogota. Bogota is the nation's capital, but it's 200 meters above sea level. So your average temp is going to be $57. Now it's international because, like I said before, a lot of businesses have offices in Bogota. All right, now we're going to talk about the Sierra Nevada de Santos on the Andes Mountains, which are 4,500 meters above sea level. So typically when we're talking about that high, you're talking about mountain peaks that are covered with snow. Lastly, we're going to talk about what they call the Jewel of Colombia, which is Medellin. That's the city of eternal springs. It has an average temperature of 71 degrees Fahrenheit year round. Now, obviously the summer goes up, but it's like spring weather year round. Now, one thing you should know about Medellin, it's in the valley or in Cup. So if you have issues with air quality, because it's in that cup, it's hard to move that air out of there. They generally get poor air quality alerts because it is hard to move that air out of the valley. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the infrastructure. Now, when I say infrastructure, since I'm American, I have family here, I need to be able to get back and forth to and from America. And generally speaking, that's 4 to 6 hours on an airplane, approximate distance of 2,822 miles. A round trip ticket, depending on how early you book and when you look, can be as cheap as $200. Now, also depending on the time and location season, it could be as much as $1,000. So you got that range in there. Most of the major cities have some form of mass transit, right? Um, uh, Cartagena has buses, Cali has Transmillennial, and Bogota has Transmillennial. So Transmillennial is a dedicated bus system. That means they have dedicated lanes on the road. Nobody else can get in those lanes but those buses. The only city that has a metro system is going to be Medellin. And it's a very safe, very clean. It's an excellent system there. People in Medellin are very, very proud of that system. So there's never trash on the system. There's no graffiti. It's There's plenty of police. It's very, very safe. Now, when you're talking about driving on the roads are poorly maintained. They're overcrowded with motorcycles, trucks, buses, bikes, motorized cars, and they all seem to be driving, um, to me, recklessly. But they don't, because there's not that many accidents. So you just have to learn to drive in that specific system where someone coming from a first world country would think that it is just chaos. Lastly, we're going to talk about culture. So culture in Colombia is almost exclusively Spanish-speaking country, with very little of the population speaking English. Unless you're in and around major cities, probably the best one is going to be Bogota, because it's an international city. You have international companies with offices there. Cartagena, it's the most tourist visited city in Colombia. So you have some people feeding off the tourists. So you're going to have some English speakers there. The other thing is that music and dance are extremely important part of the culture. It's the way they socialize, the way they interact. They take a lot of pride in their music and their dance. Family life is extremely important. It's not uncommon to find children like in the 30s or 40s living with their parents, and the children maybe living with the parents with their children, because family is very important. Now, generally speaking, they're very hardworking people. Generally, they work 6 days a week. The only day they get off is Sunday. And so, like the Lord himself, Sunday is a day of rest. Generally speaking, they're going to be with their family. That's the only day that the government recognizes as a non-working day. And so when they have it off, they're going to be around their family with some type of family activity. Now, so what are my final thoughts on Colombia? Is it a place that's right for me to retire? Well, I do the pros first. Pros: the cost of living is very low. The dollar is extremely, extremely strong. For the life you can live in Colombia, for a fraction of the cost of what you could live in the U.S. I mean, I think you could live fairly well on Social Security benefits of $1,820 something dollars or whatever it was. I think you could live a very, very good life as long as you didn't live extravagantly in Colombia on that amount of money. The proximity of travel to and from the U.S. is also a benefit. It's very convenient to get flights, and the cost, generally speaking, if you book in advance, is comparatively low. The Spanish, even though Spanish is exclusively, I mean, it's a Spanish-speaking country, so obviously, but personally, I consider Spanish a fairly easy language to learn among the other languages. And this could be my bias because I love the Spanish music and the culture and dance, and I've been around it for 20 years. So that just might be my bias. As a foreigner, not to bring you into their loop, but as a foreigner, I consider them to be very friendly and warm. Now, when I look at the cons, the level of crime, and I gave you my example with the police, and it's not uncommon, I don't think, for that type of activity. I just think that crime itself is very strongly embedded in the culture of the country. The poor roads, driving, one, safety, two, I probably would never drive at night, not because of the poor roads, but just because you could be a target for crime. Again, the poor roads, and so the travel to and around the country. Whereas a flight may take you to go from Bogota to Cali, may take you like an hour to 2 hours on the plane. It'll probably take you 12 hours in the car. It's very mountainous and windy roads. They're not done, and at night I wouldn't be safe. I wouldn't feel safe driving on those roads either because of the poorer roads or because of the crime that could happen on the roads. Also, just they're just it's just a very congested. I think the number of people that are on the road overwhelms the infrastructure of the road. So overall, it would not rate very highly as a country that I would be interested in relocating to. Even though I love the Spanish culture, I love the music and dance, and I love the proximity to US. It just the idea for me to personally have to just be on and aware of crime or to be a possible victim of crime is not the way I would want to live my life in retirement. And remember, achieve something different, believe something different, conceive something different, read something different, but most importantly, be something different. The world is waiting. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Ciao for now.